Okay, well, I'll edit that in post. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Sip and Stitch and Chat. I've been gone for a couple of weeks. First, we went to Thailand. We went to Chiang for like a week and a bit, and that was exciting, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then, while I was in Thailand, I contracted RSV, which I only found out was even a thing because I got back and got sick and couldn't figure out why I was sick for so long. And so they did testing, full respiratory panel of viruses, and I have RSV, and it's been taking weeks to resolve. And so you can hear it in my voice, and I'm sorry, I will be sniffling a little bit because I'm only at 75% recovered. Anyway, what I was saying is I've got some exciting resources to discuss this week. Some of them here in this pile of books, but some of them that I found digitally. And the reason I found one of my most recent and most exciting finds is because I'm working on the Dressing the Contessa video series, in which I'm doing a narrated version of the video. So a month ago, I released Getting Dressed in basically the 1470s to 1480s from the skin out. Right, but that wasn't narrated. That was just sort of a film piece which illustrates the process and hopefully provided beautiful imagery and whatnot. Yeah, yay sound. And now I'm taking that same footage, expanding it, and I'm adding a narration of the process from the perspective of Madame la Comtesse. So I'm narrating it in a 1470s, from a 1470s perspective. So in this framework of current events, rather than looking at it from the past. And I've actually come up with a really clever way to present lots of information about the various layers, but information in a way that a woman in the 1470s would provide information to, say, someone from the court of Constantinople who might not, well, no longer court of Constantinople. Well, yeah, let's say British ambassador from the court of Constantinople, or someone from Novgorod or Kiev, for example, who dressed very, very differently. So I'm really excited about that. But part of my process whenever I make any film is updating my research. Because of course I've learned lots over the years and maybe forgotten just as much as I've learned. But I always like to stay abreast of the research, learn the latest things, make sure that what I know is still what I know, knowledge being a fleeting and ephemeral beast. And so I was updating all of my research for each of the layers of the Franco-Burgundian ensemble, as people know it. And the two pieces for which I really wanted more documentary evidence than I have had in the past were the kirtle and the placard, as many people call it, or the placket. But as I came to discover, was in fact called a stomacher. And I finally found, after years, if not decades of looking, I finally found documentary evidence in the royal household accounts, expense accounts of the Kingdom of Scotland. Because I've actually discovered some really sad things. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and get sewing. I've actually discovered some really sad things over the last couple of days. First off, tip for you, when you are reading any source, if there are footnotes, read the footnotes. Because often the footnotes have more and better information or more relevant information for you than the main text of the thing you're reading. That's often the case with me. And the footnotes will often point you to primary source resources instead of just an analysis that might be in the text, or further primary source resources that complement the thing that source that you've already found. And that's where I found a reference to the expense accounts of the Kingdom of Scotland. And I noticed that the date on this particular expense account was 1473. And, but this is the crazy thing. Where I found the reference was not in a book or an essay or a paper or a journal or anything like that. It was in the digital Old Scots Dictionary, which is a thing, by the way, just like there's a digital Middle English dictionary, in case you didn't know, operated by the University of Michigan, which is a fantastic resource. There is also a digital Old Scots Dictionary, which is really helpful for looking up the definition of words from a long time ago and understanding the meaning of words in their historical context rather than the modern meaning of words. Because even though many of the words we use are still the same, they don't have anything like the meaning that they used to. So this particular dictionary, this Old Scots dictionary, I was looking up the word curdle, actually, because I just wanted to get a definition of the word curdle, you know, and that is a word that changed meaning over the centuries from like the 12th through the 15th century. It actually changed in how it was used and what it was meant to indicate. And in this Old Scots dictionary came the word, and one of the what the Old Scots dictionary and the Old English online dictionaries both do, which is great, they provide citations from primary sources with those words, showing you the word in context, not just in one period. They'll show you the word in context throughout all of history. You know, researchers have gone and dug through troves of archives, and I don't know, maybe it's some of these searches may be automated at this point through digital archives. They have found references for these various words. And so you can see the context in which the word was used, when it was used. And for the word curdle, I noticed there was an entry. It was a woman's curdle. And there was an entry. The entry date was 1473. And there was a manuscript abbreviation of shorthand for it, call number for it, basically. And I recognized it as a manuscript. And so I clicked on that to pull up the name of the resource, and it turned out it was the expense accounts by the Lord High Treasurer of Scotland from the years 1473 to 1591. And it was a digital resource because back in the 1850s, a society in Edinburgh formed specifically for the purpose of trawling through the archives of medieval, Renaissance, and early modern documents and transcribing them and publishing them in massive tomes. And so the work of the transcription had already been done for me, which is good because some of the paleography on these is pretty opaque. And lo and behold, that particular record that publication had been digitized, and I was able to look through it from the years 1473 all the way up to the end of the 15th century, and I could have gone beyond, but I honestly, there's so many resources for 16th century clothing like that it's not exciting to me when I find another one. More exciting is when I find ones for the 15th century. And there I found, for the first time ever, evidence, solid evidence of this square that goes over top of the curdle for women, because the Queen had several, not just one, but several in 1474, commissioned and paid for 3 different stomachus, as they're called in the Scots of the 15th century. And her king, James IV, likewise had several stomachus commissioned. And under hers, they actually described the materials they were made out of. So she had one made of black satin, she had one made of damask lined in ermine, and she had another one made of broadcloth, I think. Don't quote me on that. Is it still open over here? Oh no, it's on. Sorry, it's on my e-reader on my device. Sorry, the kitties are losing their mind. Anyway, so it was a super exciting find because not only do I finally have evidence of this being a real part of the ensemble that women definitely had and no longer conjectural, but I have the materials they were made of and the detail that one of them was lined in fur. And that makes so much sense. If you consider what's happening to the climate of the 15th century, we're entering the Little Ice Age. And so what is happening is things are getting colder and people are looking for ways to stay warm. And what better way to stay warm than to, 1, cover the gap of your front lacing girdle, and 2, to cover it with a piece of fabric that is also lined in fur. So not only the pretty fur. Now it says lined, not edged. So then in these inventories, there's different language for edging versus lining, which was another interesting discovery I've had in reading the English inventories. And also the French ones too. I think I've finally figured out the difference between lining and edging. And so what you'll have is sort of the peaking up of the ermine, probably along the straight line of the stomacher here. And that would contrast because it was actually black silk. It was a black one. She had a lot of hand. The queen in question, by the way, was Margaret of Denmark, who married into the Scottish royal family, and for who for a long time was considered possibly to be one of the owners, and might even be one of the owners of the golden gown of Queen Margaret, or was considered possibly to be one of the owners of the golden gown of Queen Margaret. Although that's sort of been debunked. Anyway, that's a different conversation. So Queen Margaret had a lot of black garments. And the nice thing about the Scottish accounts is that they talk about the linings of many of her dresses, not just her gowns, but her kirtles. So a lot of the English records that I found, the few that I found actually for queens, and even for noble ladies, and we'll talk about that when we get to our book resource tour, many of the records, the inventory expense accounts, et cetera, they tend to ignore linings unless those linings are really grand. If the lining is damask or velvet or something super expensive, really? No, that is, Chimmy, that is not a toy. Kittens, man, kittens. Anyway, they don't talk about the linings if they're not worthy of accounting in a literal sense of that term. But even for the less grand linings of Queen Margaret's gowns and kirtles, this inventory mentions them. And maybe that could be because the Scottish court was probably not as well-heeled as the Burgundian court. In fact, there's almost no way it can have been. The Lancastrian court and the Yorkist courts were kind of alternating in sort of poverty because of the whole wars that had really brought the economy of England to its knees at this point. Anyway, so the Scottish court probably, my theory is that they accounted for more and lesser valued items and components, probably because their purse was smaller than the purse of courts like their cousins in Burgundy or their cousins in France. That's my theory anyway. It's one I literally just came up with as I was speaking to you, dear viewer. And of course, if you have any questions, guys, I've got the chat right here on the side, so make sure to let me know if you have any questions. I will respond to them. So there we have details. For example, one of her kirtles was lined in the upper part, it says. And so to me, that is solid evidence of lining the bodice. Because, I don't know, maybe some of you don't know, but there are debates frequently about which layers of clothing were lined, how they were lined, whether they were lined. And for this particular kirtle, it specifically mentions payment for the lining of a kirtle, the fashioning and lining of a kirtle, and for putting in, I didn't wax this and I'm now paying the piper for that, but I didn't think to bring my wax over. So, dear viewer, sidebar, wax your thread, it will prevent it from knotting on itself the way this is completely knotting on itself all the time. We'll just have to suffer through. So, the gown is lined in the bodice in what is referred to in her inventories and Queen Margaret's inventories just as black. And so I'm assuming that because some other more sumptuous fabric, such as black, damask or satin or velvet, etc., is not mentioned, that probably it's black wool. And it's maybe a lesser fabric, and so only the color is mentioned. Or maybe for the accountant, it was commonly known what kind of black fabric this would be, and so they didn't feel the need to waste space in the accounts on it. If I find more solid evidence as to what specifically this black that is mentioned a lot in her inventories actually is, without specifying the fabric, I will let you know in some manner. Maybe in our next sip and chat, maybe in a post on the channel here, in a community post. Anyway, so yeah, some of her kirtles are fully lined, some of them be lined in the bodice. There was an example of one particularly, she has some kirtles made of broadcloth, which is wool, some kirtles made of silk, many made of silk actually. She has one purple velvet kirtle. So now I feel like I need a purple velvet kirtle. I need to up my game. And one of her kirtles was also lined in fur. And again, I think that's a sign of the times, as it were. It was getting colder and colder. And so they were looking for ways to stay warmer and warmer. You know, in our world of central heating, we forget that if your indoor temperature is, say, 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees centigrade, then you're probably not going to be terribly excited about wearing one layer of clothing. You will want to wear lots of layers, and you will want those layers to be warm, and wool and fur, etc. Silk is actually also a very good insulator. So it's not surprising that, you know, many of her gowns are also silk, other than the fact that she's a queen. But she does have gowns, and for those who don't know, in 15th century English and Scots, the word gown is the overgarment for both men and women. It is the old term for the overgarment for men and women. It is not a general word for dress in this period. It is a specific layer. It is the full, most opulent layer, the top layer, the layer that the public will always see. Remember that ladies, with the exception of some ceremonial functions, and I'll talk about that in a minute, ladies did not go out into public in just a kirtle. Now, women may have, you know, servants, peasant women, that kind of thing, but ladies did not. There's a few exceptions, and I'll mention those in the, I discuss some of them in my upcoming Dressing the Burgundian Contessa Narrated video. But one of the official ceremonial exceptions to a lady, capital L, not being seen in her kirtle is for an investiture or a coronation, because the kirtle was considered sort of it had ceremonial significance. It had meaning. And so the queen in the English queens, for example, and the French queens too, would go to the cathedral where they were going to be crowned, or the abbey where they were going to be crowned, depending on where the coronation was happening. And they would do so dressed in a kirtle, and there would be parts of the ceremony where they would be in nothing but their kirtle, or would be undressed entirely, although not necessarily to the eyes of the male participants in the coronation ceremony. So that is one case where the queen might wear just a kirtle, but just a kirtle is a bit of misleads a little bit, because by just a kirtle, I mean a kirtle made of silk damask and lined in fur, right? So it's not exactly a humble garment, and probably maybe not cut to be quite as tight as otherwise. But actually, I have no evidence on that tightness thing, because what the inventories do not say, at least none that I found thus far, they do not mention anything about the cut of the garment in the sense of tight, loose. Although some will say long, like sometimes there's an adjective of a long gown for the queen or a long gown for the duchess, which makes one wonder what a not long gown is, because you know, ladies, capital L, are always depicted in gowns with trains in this era. So what is a long gown? Does that mean long in the front, long in the back, just longer in the back? You know, it's details like that that make historical fashion research tantalizing, because it's like solving a mystery, it's solving a puzzle. And I will say that the detective work for me is part of the fun, and the joy of that eureka moment is is something I constantly seek. And, the good thing about history is that history is not set in stone. Contrary to the way history is presented to most pupils, history and our understanding of history is constantly evolving with the revelation of new information, which makes it not a static subject at all, but a very dynamic and constantly evolving subject. And that is exciting, at least to me it is. So my big discovery just this week, actually, the expense accounts for Margaret of Denmark, Queen of Scotland, and the details that it contains about furring, and that's the other thing. So the language for edging versus lining. So the word for edging, if you're looking in an inventory and it says that the gown, what often happens, depending on the kind of inventory it is they will mention, if it's a post-mortem inventory, an inventory of the items taken after a lady's death or a gentleman's death, then often they will actually account a garment in its various components and break the value down. Because my theory is that often these garments were going to be taken apart and sold for their components, because the fur is actually more valuable than the fabric in many cases. And so what they will say is gown worth, 10 pounds, or they'll say silk damask of a gown worth 10 pounds, lining of a gown of this kind of fur, martin in English, I think, worth 20 pounds, and edging, then it will say the perfel of the gown worth this much, and then all together this sum. So it will actually break those components up, which tells you that the fur lining is a different component than the fur edging. And the word for edging in 15th century English and Scots is perfel or perfel. I will admit I didn't take the time to look up the pronunciation. Sorry about that. Is edging, so perfel or perfel, and it's spelled, literally 12 different ways, I think I saw in the dictionary for it, in both the Scots dictionary and the Old English dictionary. And it literally just, perfel means edging or border of fabric or fur, and specifically for garments, it seems. And so, then you have the furring, which refers to the inside of the garment, so the entire lining. And you can also tell that by the quantities that are involved, right? Sometimes the inventories will say a perfel, and a perfel has maybe consisting of 20 beasties, and I love the word beasties, and the furring will consist of 80 or 90 beasties. Right, so you can tell that one is a much more voluminous section than the other, which is another good thing about these inventories, is that they always specify the quantity of the item. If it's fabric, then they'll give you either the number of ells or the number of pieces consisting of how many ells, or the number of quarters, or sometimes pounds, although usually pounds is referred to unspun fiber. So you can tell if, for example, in the case of Queen Margaret's stomachus, that it's not a big garment because it's only 1 ell. They talk about that they literally, usually these inventories, it's about purchasing fabric and sending it to a tailor. And by the way, Queen Margaret of Denmark had lady tailors, which you don't often see for actual garments. Usually women seamstresses are reserved for the linen undergarments, for small clothes, for shirts, for braids, for sometimes stockings, but not often. Or silk work, the weave, the points and the embroidery and that sort of thing. You don't often see women, I haven't often seen women in inventories or expense accounts, actually not inventories, expense accounts that are tailors. But Queen Margaret of Denmark had one, her name was Isabel, I forget, of something starting with an H. And she had another lady tailor. And that's because it says in the inventory that, 18 ells of black silk damask purchased by my lady and sent to Isabel for the fashioning of a gownness, a gown. So I thought that was a very interesting peek into Queen Margaret's household that, she had at her, I'm not certain if on retainer or at her beck and call or as a permanent member of her household. I guess I could look at the wages section and see if Isabel was a permanent employee or a contractor. She had a lady tailor who fashioned her gowns for her, which I thought was very interesting. And so, the parts of her gowns, very often the collar is separate. So that's an interesting look into the construction of these gowns. The collars are mentioned as being separate and valued separately and made separately. And often in Queen Margaret's expense, it's not really an inventory, it's an expense account. In Queen Margaret's expense account, often there is a commission for just a collar, the furring of a collar. And so this really tells me, this indicates to me something I've kind of theorized about. Collars they take a lot of damage from our skin, wear and tear, right? There's a lot of action and activity happening here. You move your shoulders, you move your arms. So there's a lot of rubbing that happens here in this area. And of course, even if you have a smock and a kirtle, no matter how well designed they may be, eventually the collar of your gown is probably going to come in contact with your skin and a lot of your skin, and sweat will be soaked into it and stains will develop. And so my thought is that in the case of collars that are not furred, because a furred collar will actually resist staining and sweat, that they actually replace them occasionally to refresh them, especially for a lady like the Queen. She should not have her gowns should not look worn, right? And even in the case of fur collars, again, the wear and tear, the rubbing will happen. And what will happen is that in the spot that is probably flush against the skin, because I've seen this in vintage fur coats, in old fur coats, the area right here, invariably in these fur coats, it wears thin. It wears down to the hide, right? So I suspect that probably also happens on furred collars. And so occasionally you need to replace or refur the collar. And that is borne out in this expense account. I know, it's so geeky. I'm sorry if I'm boring you, dear viewer, but this is just all very exciting to me. This window into the court of Scotland in the 1470s. Who would have thunk? And this very sort of workaday, prosaic look into the court, because history is generally written and presented from the perspective of great battles and great treaties and great plagues, gun steals and pathogens, right? But it doesn't, to me, that's not what is interesting about history. I mean, understanding how we are where we are now, that is interesting to me. But what really, really has always fascinated me from my youngest days as a toddler, not a toddler, but maybe just post-toddler, and playing games of make-believe in preschool with my friends, I always wanted to pretend to be in the olden days. And I recognize now that I've always had this yearning to understand how people lived in past times, and to understand it both intellectually, and then, of course, as you can see, to experience how people lived in past times. Their daily activities, what was the average morning like for a queen in the 1470s? What was the average morning like for a duchess in the 1470s? A duchess regnant, a duchess, a royal peer. Those are all different kinds of roles. And what did they do in the morning? What came afterwards? What happened next? Like, these are the details that really fascinate me, but these are also the details that are often the hardest to illuminate. So expense accounts, in my opinion, are one way to help illuminate, a very good way to help illuminate those details. In fact, one of the resources I'm going to show you, the household the Howard household books are the household books from a lord who would become the Duke of Norfolk in 1483, I believe. Norfolk. I'm not certain how it's pronounced in England. I know how it's pronounced in Virginia. Not nicely. The household account books of this Lord cum Duke are super, super detailed. I mean, wow. Every person who got wages, every single purchase, the tip for the boy who brought the eels, who delivered the eels from the river. I mean, every single detail. Spices are detailed. Whether they're powdered or whole is detailed. Whether they're fresh or dried is detailed. Clothing is detailed. Fabric purchases are detailed. Repairs are detailed. Like the mending of shoes, the mending of clothing, how much it cost to mend them, who mended them. It gives you a clear idea that the household of a 15th century English lord/duke was, of course, basically its own corporation, but it was a cooperative corporation in which everyone in the household, all of their needs were taken care of by the lord. He paid for everything. All of his employees, he paid for the repairs of the purchase of new and the repairs of old shoes and clothing. Food was provided for. It's really, really fascinating. It talks about the amount of money that was paid in alms, amount of money that was paid to the palmer to pray for them and their deceased loved ones, the amount of money that was donated on various holy days, for example, in December leading up to Christmas and the 12th night season, how much money was given to the local church for masses sung and prayers to be said. It really just completely illustrates daily life in a way that a painting can only sort of do. And from a period where we don't necessarily have an abundance of visual imagery that isn't also somehow religious or allegorical or fantastical or legendary. So these household account books, I'll bring those out in a little when we go through our book corner. But yeah, the discoveries I've had in the Howard household books, really just wonderful. Which brings me to some sad discoveries this week. So for years upon years, I have been desperately seeking the expense accounts for Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy, and even for Mary of Burgundy in the 1460s, 1470s, 1480s. Well, I have been able to find expense accounts, and even the Duke, and even Charles the Bold. I have been able to find super detailed expense accounts for Philip the Bold from the first Valois Duke of Burgundy, so for late 14th century, for John the Fearless, early 15th century, and for Philip the Good, who died in 1458, I think. But I have only found little fragments of some expense accounts for Charles the Bold, and nothing for Margaret of York. And I just thought that it was because maybe they haven't been digitized, or maybe I haven't been using the right search terms. And so periodically I do a search again to see if I can find something. Well, it turns out that all of these records should be held in what I finally found out, in the archives of the Département du Nord, Lille, France. This is a department, it's like a county, state, or something between a county and a state in France, basically. And that was where the Dukes of Burgundy transferred their archives from Dijon in the 1450s, I think, to Lille. Well, during the French Revolution, apparently, a lot of things were burnt. And unfortunately, some of the things I found in a footnote in a book that was, let me back up. Okay, a lot of things were burnt during the French Revolution. And how did I find this out? Well, again, back in the 1840s and or 1850s in France, a society was founded with the intent of digging through all of the medieval, Renaissance, and early modern archives and transcribing them and publishing them, right? It was all part of this Victorian movement, this fascination with the Middle Ages that they had. And we owe the Victorians a lot in terms of this research. I mean, they created very false impressions of medieval life, but they also really made a lot of resources available that would have otherwise still be unavailable. And one of the things they transcribed was archives, and they collated so many different records and compiled them into tomes of like materials. So they actually went and found all of the expense accounts that were in the archives for the dukes and duchesses of Burgundy and their family members, I think it was called. And they turned that into a book, not just a book, like a series of books, lots and lots of books. They compiled them into books and transcribed them and published them. And then since then, those books have been digitized. And I was reading through the introduction of one of them. Introductions, by the way, can contain also tons of valuable information that might not be in the actual main body of the text of the book you are reading. I was reading the introduction of the tome that had the dates that were relevant to my period of interest and should have hypothetically had the household accounts for Margaret of the expense accounts and household accounts for Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy, and also Dowager Duchess of Burgundy. And I found the statement that, unfortunately, we have no expense accounts. They have, at that point in the 1850s at any rate, they had not found any expense accounts for Margaret of Burgundy because they went up in flames during the French Revolution. And also most of Charles the Bold's inventories and expense accounts went up in flames during the French Revolution. So we have details about duchesses preceding Margaret of York, so up to the 1450s. We have information from the 1510s onward for Marguerite d'Autriche, but there's this big gap of time, the time that is my interest, that apparently doesn't exist anymore. And that is sad. That is very, very sad. And unfortunately, the Burgundian state was so well organized, and I know that's a strange thing to say, but hear me out, that it is probably unlikely that there are records of the like somewhere else, because as polities go, the Duchy of Burgundy is an amazing and unparalleled organization in its era. I don't think people realize how close history was to having a state of Burgundy, a country of Burgundy rather than a country of France. And so the Burgundian state had bureaucracy down to a very fine science. And so I really do find it unlikely that we're going to find some random accountings shoved in the wall of some castle somewhere to be used as insulation because it was found to be unnecessary, or, I sadly don't think that's going to happen. That we're going to find something in some other library somewhere at some point. So that means I'm going to reach out to the Département du Nord and ask if this is in fact true, if there are no expense accounts. I'm really mostly interested in the expense accounts, but inventories will do for Margaret of York. And then I found out that it seems that it's probably the same situation for the Queen's Consort of England in this period, is that there do not seem to be very much in the way of expense accounts for the Queen's Consort up until Elizabeth of York, and even then the only thing I have found for Elizabeth of York is a Privy Purse expense account from 1502 to 1506, which fashion-wise is not my period of interest, and postdates my period of interest by several decades. So, and I found out that possibly these no longer exist either, for whatever reason, despite the fact that there are thousands upon thousands of miles of scrolls of Privy Purse accounts, Great Wardrobe accounts, etc., for the royal House of England. But there it is. That was my sad discovery. Now, it could be that there might be expense accounts in the archives. Unfortunately, I went and poked through the archives a little bit and found some. Unfortunately, the ones that have been digitized were digitized in black and white and in a very low quality. It's very hard to read the documents, and they're in a paleographic hand. They're in 15th century lettera batarda, and written very close together. And so I can barely make out, the text at all. So having, a poor photocopied or poorly scanned digitized version of the record is not useful to me at any rate. So until someone decides to go and do their research work, I guess, on the privy purse expenses of Elizabeth Woodville or Queen Anne Neville, Richard III's queen, probably we're not going to have very much light cast on the details of their expenditures and commissions and purchases, which is kind of sad. But for that, I now have these Scottish accounts, which I will say, the Scottish accounts read very, very much like the French accounts, and what I do have of English accounts, specifically these household books. So I know a lot of people who pursue, a Scottish persona, who are looking into recreating a medieval Scottish lady or lord. Many of them come at it with this very romantic perspective of, sure. Can you all still hear me? Is there still sound? Hopefully. If you have any questions, guys, pop them in the chat. I will be happy. We'll be very happy to answer questions. I should say that sorry, just checking to make sure I haven't missed any comments here. Okay. I should say that today's live stream is brought to you by Armor and Castings. They are a fantastic set. They are a fantastic reproduction medieval jeweler. Many of the pieces in my Burgundian ensemble are them. In fact, I think all of any metal bits in my Burgundian ensemble are them. So the beautiful belt buckle on that wide belt and belt end, what is called a harness, harness in the 15th century sources, and the beautiful collar that you all admire so much in so many of my videos, and of course my new brooch on my silk hood. Those are all Armor and Castings, and they're a Ukrainian company, and they are still producing despite the fact that there is an ongoing war in the Ukraine, and they have been producing the whole time. And they are an official sponsor of the Creative Contessa. I can highly recommend their products. High quality, super reproductions, huge range of time period, from ancient Roman all the way up to the 17th century. Rings, buckles, coronets, brooches, all sorts of wonderful pieces. Badges also. So take a look at their website, armorandcastings.com. And of course, I also could not continue doing this content game without the support of my generous patrons on Patreon. So if you feel like supporting me, I know, cheap plug, if you would like to see more such content and see me continue making such content, please do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. I provide a whole host of extra material. For example, that is where I will be sharing this expense account for Queen Margaret of Denmark that I found. I share extra premium video content there, full hour tutorials on a variety of topics, extra footage that I publish for the general public, funny outtakes, digital resources, sometimes recipes and whatnot that I mention in my videos or even teach. So please do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Okay, cheap plug over. But yeah, for 3 years now, I've been receiving support from very generous people, and I really do appreciate that. I know that money is tight these days, and so if someone is willing to financially support my historical creative research and activities, then I'm honored and flattered by that. Yeah, Armor and Castings, they really have gorgeous stuff, but also very reasonably priced. And they're really great people. I got to finally meet in person at Pennsic, and we had a lovely conversation. And next week, I think next week. And next week, I'm going to be doing a live unboxing of a package I received from them with some very interesting, I'm hoping some very interesting items. We'll be opening it together and I'll be going through it and showing you what they sent me as part of my sponsorship package. And they're working on a coronet for me, a new coronet for my hennin, not a hennin, my turret. So I'm very excited to be getting that soon. Yeah, I love their stuff, and they stand by their product. If something breaks or wears away, they will replace it free of charge. So, Armor and Castings, check them out. Let's see, that made me think of something specific. Oh, yes, speaking of turrets and not a hennins, I think in Queen Margaret's expense account, I think I may have even found a line item for a not a hennin. And if you want to know why I'm calling it not a hennin, check out my video on the most glorious medieval hat, the not a hennin. Because they're called in England, they were called turrets. That's one of the words for them, or horn. And I think I actually found a line item. It said turretus, and it was talking about the material, silk for a turretus. And I think that might be a turret, not a hennin. So that would be exciting, because otherwise, often expense accounts from this period will not necessarily, they'll talk about for a hat or a bonnet, but they won't specify the shape or the kind of bonnet. They won't use a specific word for it. Literature uses specific word for it because authors are always trying to illustrate things for their readers. So they might use a word like turret or horn or something more specific. But the accounts tend just to say hat or bonnet. So it's very exciting to me that I may have found an actual line item that is specifically not just for a hat or a bonnet, any hat or any bonnet, but for a turret, not a hennin. Yeah. I apologize for my sniffling again. I'm still fighting RSV. It's great. I'm so low energy and so frustrated by being low energy. You know, it's bad when I don't feel like taking a walk, because I'm a pretty high energy person and I usually exercise about 3 to 4 hours a day. And my desk is an elliptical cross trainer. That's my workstation. But I'm so exhausted these days that I just don't have the energy even for that. Let's see. Any questions thus far, anyone? Remember, you can drop them in the comments. I am watching. So I'm making progress here on my, these are the skirts of my new camorra. Right. And we're getting close-ish to being done. This project was going to be a 2-week project, and now it's become a 1.5-year project, probably by the time it's done. Just so much has happened in my life in the last year, and other projects came in, like the belt, the broad girdle harnessed, as it's called in several English accounts that I have found, including Elizabeth Poining née Paston, who had a will, and her will specified a great number of details of her clothing, including she had a whole passel of broade girdles, which broad belts, harnessed and made of very, very lovely fabrics indeed, all sorts of damask and silk and cloth of gold even. She had one of cloth of gold. I don't have wills or expense accounts or post-mortem inventories or anything like that for Margaret of York, but I have them for other people. So I guess I have one for Duchess Cecily Neville, Duchess or Lady Cecily Neville, Duchess of Warwick, and now Queen Margaret of Scotland. So I feel like I'm collecting the inventories of the royal houses of Europe. I have Charlotte of Savoy's post-mortem inventory, which was extremely illuminating. yeah, but apparently I don't get to get that close to Margaret of York. And it's one of the frustrating things about, I have several biographies of Margaret of York, and with every biography, I'm hoping that in the footnotes, somewhere there will be something, some reference to inventories, expense accounts, wills, etc. for her, and none of them ever have any of that. And I always wondered why, because I think as a biographer, you know, that's like a key aspect of your subject's life. And now I understand why, because maybe they don't exist. And so invariably biographies about Margaret of York are very dry, in my opinion. They like to sort of place her in this pedestal of great and powerful medieval princess, which she was. I mean, don't get me wrong, she was that. And she was diabolical and clever and savvy and powerful and wealthy and all of those things. I cannot deny that any of those things are true, but they never ever go into the details of her as a person, as, you know, private letters, or, you know, they make all these grand assumptions. Well, Mary of Burgundy and Margaret of York must have been very close because of the way they handled politics and political arrangements and alliances. And, you know, she must have loved her grandchildren and great-grandchildren because she personally raised them in her palace at Mechlin. You know, but they never ever, I want to know about her as a real person. You know, what time did she wake up? When did she break her fast? Did she go to mass first, as she probably should have? How did she dress herself when she was just about in her own private quarters? Did she put on different layers to go out and, you know, conduct official business? What did she eat for lunch? Did she have lunch? Did she have supper? Did she have dinner? Did she play games during the day? How did she amuse herself? Or was it just all business, 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 business? Because if you read these biographies, you would think this poor woman probably died at the age of 53 from stress, because all she ever did was run her estates, reign over grand swaths of territory, arrange political alliances, try to usurp Henry VII, you know, basically engage in political machinations from dawn until dusk. Like, if you read her biographies, that's what it feels like. Like, she didn't have a private life. So I have to say that's something that always disappoints me about biographies about Margaret of York. It's like she had no private life. I'm confident she did, but no one seems interested in finding out what that was. Oh yeah, thank you for the healing vibes, everyone. It's been a slow process, and I probably should have gone to the hospital to get an antiviral treatment. But I'll be honest, I do not. One of my other jobs is professional translator, and for years I have done professional translation work, and I used to do it full time for a major pharmaceutical company, and so I understand at a very, very deep level that pharmaceutical solutions, interventions, will maybe correct one thing, but they will set something else off balance. There is always a price for a pharmaceutical intervention. And I don't like the price for certain pharmaceutical interventions, and antivirals are very powerful and can have a really deleterious effect on other systems and long-term effects, possibly. So I didn't feel like I was unwell enough to merit the potential cost of an antiviral treatment. And so I've just been letting my own immune system do its thing, and my own immune system has just been dragging its heels. I mean, I have my homemade bone broth that is made, you know, basically the dissolved carcass of an organic chicken with all sorts of vegetables and powerful, you know, spices with really powerful actives in it. So I've been drinking that every day. I even made another batch yesterday. I've been, you know, boosting my immune system with all sorts of herbal teas and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, this RSV has just been dragging the hell out. And it's so frustrating for me. But at least my work is pretty flexible, so I can continue to do it even though I'm sick. Yay. Yeah. So I hope to have this Camorra done by January, when I will be running my Decameron event, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I run this little intimate immersive event called the Decameron, which is literally supposed to be an imitation of that work by Boccaccio, in which we are a group of noble companions retreating to the countryside to disport and divert ourselves in the face of a great plague. And we have a site in Alabama, actually, outside of Selma, that is a site for medievalists. It's called Dalwhinnie Fields. And it is out in the country, and it has a very good ambiance for being in the United States. And we go and we read stories from the Decameron, and we dance, and we sing, and we read poetry, and we go for strolls through the countryside together, and we play games, and we eat amazing, amazing medieval food prepared by a very skilled kitchen. Authentic medieval food, not medieval-esque food. And it is, we have a fantastic musician, Master Albrecht, for those of you who are in the SCA, or Al Coffrin, for those of you who are not. And we really do, and deeds of arms in beautiful, full harness, metal, full armor. Some of you maybe know that term better than harness. And we go on quests. We have a quest, and each Decameron has a different theme. And this one is the Odyssey. And so we're going to have a very fun quest. We are going to appoint someone to be Odysseus, and he or she will have to go on a quest to try to return home and to overcome all of the challenges that Odysseus faces on the way. And each of us, the staff, we are a character in the Odyssey. I'm trying to decide between being Penelope or being Callisto or Circe. It's a hard choice. So yeah, I'll be running that. It's a 5-day event in January. 12th night, actually. It's literally on top of 12th night this year. And in Alabama in January is beautiful. The weather is lovely. Not too humid, cool-ish temperatures. We actually get to wear all of our layers of medieval attire comfortably indoors and outdoors. It's a beautiful time. So I'm hoping to have this done in time for that, is the current goal. We'll see about that. I guess if I really put my nose to the grindstone, there's been some roadblocks in our life that have prevented me from being as productive as I should be. So I have not been as productive on my creative projects as I might like. Yes, so let's see, I've got the skirts I have to finish, I have to finish the seams. I will be applying the perfel. The bottom of them will be finished with a band of fabric, actually, same fabric as this, but I'm going to do it the way that the only extant camorra that we have is finished, in that the band of fabric actually is going to extend just beyond the top of the actual shell fabric, and that means that the band of fabric that finishes the hem will be the thing that takes all of the drag damage from the skirts. And so that will wear away, and then I can just replace the pieces of the band as they wear away, rather than having holes worn into the skirts that you can see that I then have to patch in some manner. So I'm very excited. This will be the second dress whose hem I've finished in that manner. And the other one, actually, it will be the first dress I finished in that manner. So I have used bands of fabric to finish hems on other dresses, but they did not protrude beyond the shell fabric. So they took some of the damage of drag, but not all of the damage of drag. So I'm very excited to see how this works out in long-term wear and tear. Here we are. Almost done with this panel. Yay. Okay, once I reach the bottom of this, we're going to take a break and finish up with the book tour, my resources of this week. So I can talk about some of my digital resources. At some point, I'm going to figure out, unfortunately, I have to get streaming software to do what it is I'm about to talk about doing, and that is have multiple screens so that I can actually stream my screen while also having a nice, proper camera doing the streaming. And so I can't show you this, but I will tell you about it. 2 resources for medieval living history research that I can highly recommend. One is the online Middle English Dictionary, operated by the University of Michigan. I wonder if I have the link open. And then the other one, this one is open, so I'll go ahead and post this in the chat. The Middle English, excuse me, not Middle anything, Old Scots Dictionary, online dictionary. And what's great about both of these dictionaries is that they have been set up to account for the myriad orthography that exists in medieval languages, especially in the Isles, as it were. Because, of course, Middle English orthography was not standard, and nor was Old Scots orthography. And so even in the same text, by the same scribe or the same author, you may find the same word spelled 8 different ways. In fact, in Margaret of Denmark's expense account, one of her tailors, his name is Kirkettle. His last name is Kirkettle. And as I was reading through the inventory, I was literally saying, oh, look, here's Kirkettle spelt a different way. And here it is a different way. And I literally counted 8 spellings for this man's name within 4 pages of expense accounts. So these online dictionaries thankfully account for that variability in orthography. And so they're pretty powerful search tools. And like I said, one of the great things about the Old Scots Dictionary and the Middle English Dictionary is that they provide citations from primary sources in the original language in which these terms appear. And then, even better yet, they provide the source citation, the work cited for each of those citations, and you can go and look up that document. And sometimes, very often, they are online, they're digitized. So it's a great way to find new resources for things like garments. Because if you look up the word kirtle, for instance, hint, hint, you're going to find it's linked to a whole bunch of inventories and literature that use the word kirtle. So you'll be able to find other resources by just looking up a word in these dictionaries, these online dictionaries. Highly recommend this Old Scots Dictionary has been really a whole new vista for my medieval daily life research. Yeah, it's been pretty fun, and the language is just so fun. And actually, what I did notice, this is the funny thing, what I noticed in Margaret of Denmark's accounts is that the language evolves from the 1470s to the accounts in the 90s, and that as you move forward in time, the language used in the accounts gets much more Scots, by which I mean that in the 1470s, the language being used in these expense accounts is pretty similar, almost exactly the same as the language that's being used in, say, the Paston Wills and the Paston Letters. Very, very similar. You can't really feel a difference. But by the 1570s, as I'm reading, I just happened to glance at some of the expense accounts from the 1570s. The language sounds a lot more like Robbie Burns, which I found very amusing. And I think I commented aloud to my condottiero, yeah, I feel like these expense accounts get much more Scottish as time goes forward. Which kind of makes languages diverge more in general as time progresses. Scots being a derivative of English, basically. I know there's going to be probably some angry comments about that, but it's true. Scots is not Gaelic, by the way, just to be clear, not Gaelic. This is not, these accounts are not in Gaelic, they are in Scots. What are you guys doing? No. Hey, psst, psst. I need to get a squirt bottle. Unfortunately, so these kittens, I will tell you their origin story as I finish up this hem. These kittens, they do have a sad story. So they were found on the roof of a cafe here in Daegu in South Korea, and the cafe owner heard them and was keeping an eye on them and noticed that their mommy did not come back for 3 days. And unfortunately, she was probably hit by a car. But the mommy loved her kittens enough, or cared for her kittens enough, love is maybe too anthropomorphic a sensation. Anyway, cared for her kittens enough to put them on the roof of the cafe it was a single-story cafe, for safety. And what they noticed, they caught in the surveillance, because there are cameras everywhere, what they caught in the cameras, it was weird, something just flashed across my screen, was one of the kittens, after like day 2 of mommy not coming back, one of the kittens climbed down the wall, and we're talking little kitten, like 5 weeks old, climbed down the wall of the cafe, disappeared, and then came back with food and brought food back with him to help feed his siblings. I have one of those too. I got 2 of the kittens. So when they realized the mommy was not coming back, they captured the kittens, and they were fostered until finding a permanent home for them all. And 3 of the 5 kittens found homes, and there were 2 left. And when I heard about them, I said, well, I miss my Hwagu. I miss my tiny house tiger. So he's with my father-in-law currently, and I haven't seen him in a little while. Got to get back. I'll be heading back home being Covington, Washington. I'll be heading back home in a little bit, but in the meanwhile, when I'm here visiting my husband, my condottiero, I want to have kittens, and he loves kittens so much. So we now have 2 tweenies who are very ornery, and they're adorable, and they play with each other, but they use their claws a lot for climbing, because I think they learned that the only way they could get up and down safely was by all claws out. And in fact, I have a wool tapestry, a reproduction of Sight from the La Dame La Licorne series of tapestries at the Cluny. And it's wool. I mean, you can smell it. Like, it really smells like sheep. And of course, cats love sheep wool, by the way. They just do. They love the smell of lanolin. And I'm not certain if that's like a long time ago thing, like eons ago when they were big enough to hunt wild sheep. But they also love the feeling of the tapestry under their claws, and it makes the tapestry weave makes it really easy for them to claw their way up. So I had to figure out something to stop them from using my expensive reproduction made in France tapestry, or made in the Low Countries tapestry, from becoming their ladder. Yeah, and now they're using our loner sofa as a ladder, so that's not good. That's and a jungle gym, actually, but jungle gym with claws out. So I've got to, hey, stop it. Gosh darn it. Oh, so ornery. I apologize for that sniff, everyone. Okay, well, here is one seam done. At least the seaming part of the seaming is done. And now we just have to turn. I'll be turning the edges on both sides and creating basically a finished seam that looks like this. And no, it is not necessary for me to turn the edges, actually, because this is wool and it's not really going to fray. But I like the effect that it has had on the skirts here, because it actually creates a kind of soft boning, and it actually will help the skirts stand out more from my legs than if I just left it unfinished. So that's the nature of this wool, this herring, this twill weave, sorry, not tabby. This twill weave is that it actually makes, when you turn the fabric twice like this, it actually creates a very 3-dimensional finish, and that helps the skirts stand out more. So I'm doing that on purpose as a structural finish, not necessarily as a need to protect the edge of this wool, because it really doesn't need protection. I do also like the look of a clean inside, which, based on the way that Osana's Gamora is finished, maybe is not perhaps the 15th century perspective on how seams should be finished, but it's how I want to finish it for structural reasons and for aesthetic reasons. Otherwise, probably, I think on Osana's, I think the seam is just opened flat and then it's just sewn down, which I guess would give some extra rigidity to the skirts, but I do like this extra rigidity here. Okay, questions about this project before we move on to the book corner and other resources corner? I guess while I give you guys a chance, I do have it open. While I give you guys a chance to ask your questions, let me just post the link for the Middle English Compendium. This, let me tell you, this Middle English Compendium, it has been a real lifesaver for me. I mean, lifesaver, that's maybe too strong. In terms of research into medieval material and cultural life, it has been a trove of information. Some researchers have done some really excellent work here, really excellent. Okay, well, you can still ask questions, and if you have any questions, they can come up. So let's talk about some of today's resources. This book, I think I've discussed before, but I'll discuss it again. Court and Civic Society in the Burgundian Low Countries. Dry name for a roller coaster of a soap opera of texts. This is a compendium of texts from chroniclers who lived at the time, contemporary chroniclers who lived at the time and witnessed firsthand life in the Burgundian court. And it dates basically from John the Fearless all the way up to the early 16th century Dukes of Burgundy. So like Philip the Handsome, Felipe el Hermoso, for those who are familiar with the Spanish royal house, and Charles V even, who was, also the heir of the Duchy of Burgundy. So there's a lot of it's broken up by section. There's a whole section on Burgundian spectacles. So if you want to know what an actual medieval event, a feast, a tournament, etc., was like, this is the book for you, because the chroniclers here go into explicit detail about feasts and tournaments and entry ceremonies. Those are the kind of events that many of us are trying to recreate, and here are the details of them. And after reading this book many times, I can tell you that I need a bigger budget, a much bigger budget to do a proper medieval event. At least in the Burgundian style, because my God, the Burgundian budget and taste for spectacle. I mean, we're talking with full sets and machinery and costumes and singing and dancing and, we're talking opera, basically. The Burgundian intermezzo is the origin of opera, and that is absolutely true. That is not me making this up. So yeah, I feel like I need a bigger budget to run a good, proper medieval 15th century event. And yeah, I know that not everyone all the time, that wasn't how life was for everyone all the time. Obviously, these are special occasions, but still, I would like to run just once. I would like to recreate or host an event a la Borgogne, the way they're described here. But also, they talk about court life and they talk about court intrigue. So there's an entire section on the case of one of the Duke's men who poisoned people and actually ended up paying the penalty for his crimes. And they talk about his final minutes and his execution. It's like, holy cow. So, and then they talk about interactions with the cities and the festivals that the cities would host for the Duke and the Duchess. Yeah, very exciting book. Court and Civic Society. I think I might do some videos of readings from some of these chronicles because they are pretty interesting to listen to. Okay, other books. Okay, this one. Grand Corne et Osature. So, great horns and tall headdresses, right? This is by the École du Louvre, and the School of the Louvre, and it is one of their research. They publish different research books. I have to go look and see what else they published, actually. But this is basically a publication on what people call the Henin, and which it wasn't called that at all, actually. And it's funny how that came to be. It's actually the Victorians are the reason we call it that incorrectly. But this is a compilation. It's all in French, so you will have to be able to read French. It's a compilation of research on this iconic headdress. And they provide literary references, and they delve into the extant references, accounts, and all sorts of things. So it was a very illuminating read, and very interesting. Although I have to say, I'm disappointed by some of the imagery that they include, because they do include a lot of allegorical and legendary imagery, which depicts, you know, headdresses in ways that real people never wore them. So that is a little disappointing when a researcher falls for that trap. But, you know, researchers, we're people too, and we make mistakes. But yeah, I can highly recommend this book if you are interested in this iconic conical headdress. In English, they were called horns or miters, and I think also corns sometimes as well. Also possibly sometimes referred to as just bonnets or even just hats, right? We're less, like I said earlier, we don't know necessarily when a source mentions a bonnet or a hat, we don't know what the shape of it is necessarily, because unlike today where bonnet and hat conjure kind of a very specific thing, in 15th century English, bonnet and hat didn't have necessarily a fixed shape, right? Anyway, Grand Corne et aux Atours from the School of the Louvre. Highly recommend if you can speak French or if you have a friend who can help you understand what's in this book. On the Italian side of things, I'm sorry, many of my resources are going to be in other languages. I apologize for that, but unfortunately a lot of these sources for non-English culture have not been translated. So, Ricordanze from 1433 to 1483. And Ricordanze is it's not, people translate it as a memoir, it kind of is, but memoir in a much, sorry, I guess the screen timed out for a moment. Memoir in a much more holistic sense of not feelings and thoughts at all, in fact, but the memoir of a family and the daily habits in a family. So this is more like a diary or a journal, but also ones that include purchases and expenditures and plans for clothing and interactions with people. And so a ricordanza is a great resource for medieval and Renaissance Italian clothing, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries. And this one is specifically, so it's part of a series called La Memoria Familiare, so familial memory. And this one is from the family, the Martelli family. And it's about, this is one specific man, Ugolino di Niccolo Martelli. And, you know, it covers, like you can see, period. And so there's a lot of very interesting things that happen to the family, clothing, and of course, as always, there's almost more footnotes than the main document. And so those footnotes can be very valuable in helping you expand on your exploration of 14th and 15th century Italian life and clothing and fashion. So yeah. If you are ever, that's a term if you're looking for documentary evidence for Italy or any of the Italies. Ricordanze or ricordanza is a good term, right? Okay. Name of book again. Oh, sorry. That just now popped up. So I'll go through all the books quickly again. We have Court and Civic Society in the Burgundian Low Countries. We have for the not a Henin, Grand Corne et aux Atours, right? And when this posts, I'll try to put these books in the description of the post, right? I don't want to take the time to type them up right now. And then here, Ricordanze from 1433 to 1483, and it's part of the Memoria Familiare series, right? So I haven't looked to see what else they may have in their collection. I should probably do that. Okay. So then I did mention the Howard household books. And so household books is another term you might want to use in quotes if you are looking for 15th century English inventories, expense accounts, etc. And this one has an introduction by Anne Crawford. And it is literally a reprint of like I said, the work of these Victorian scholars in the archival work, which seems to have been a big thing, obviously from Scotland to England to France. I'm now wondering, it's funny, I've never thought to look at it for German sources before. I wonder if there were any Prussian scholars at the time who were doing this sort of scholarship. Maybe less likely because Prussia was otherwise engaged in other focused. Prussia had a different focus in the 19th century than England did. Anyway, so yeah, these household books, really just amazing. Going through, you can see the little yellow stickies, and I've started identifying pages specifically for clothing, and then I'm going to go through with different stickies and identify pages for foodstuffs. And yeah, because for instance, on this one, it talks about fabric and clothing items. So item paid here for a shirt for Davy, 3 shillings and 4 denarii. Item here paid for 15 stakes of Holland. Holland is a very fine linen. Price per the stake, and I don't know what a stake is. That's a new measurement. Price here, or paid here for a plait of lawn, which is a very fine linen. Paid here for another girdle, for the making of a pouch for Master Thomas. Paid for a dagger, right? There's all kinds of things. And then here, paid for 1 yard of puke or 2 pair of hosen. And I'm going to assume that probably, for 1 yard, it's going to be cleverly put together, or those are hosen for women. In this period, in 15th century English, there is no distinction between hosen for men and hosen for women in terms of the word. It's hosen for both. Yeah, then here, this is interesting, paid the same day for the sewing of 3 federbettes, 3 bolsters, and 9 pillows. That's a lot of pillows. Yeah, but so, like I said, you really get a look into the daily life of people in this book. The Howard household books are just beautiful in the level of detail. Page that I thought was really interesting. And on the 25th day of August, my master paid for a pot, the lower part of it copper and the upper part brass. Right? I mean, that's interesting. So now I want to have a pot made where the lower part is copper and the upper part is brass. And I'm assuming that's possibly because copper conducts heat differently than brass, and they want the bottom part, which is going to take the majority of the heat, to be copper to conduct the heat in a specific way, and the upper part is brass because brass is much less reactive than copper is, and then you probably don't have to tin as much of it. I'm thinking aloud here of why that would be, what the benefit of that would be. Yeah, so Howard household books, a really fascinating read. It really is like looking back in time. And what's really nice is that in the gloss of the Howard household books, they actually keep the date there for you to see, or the year anyway. So like I was just reading from 1466 for the year. And as you progress forward in the book, you progress up in time. Now there's 2 batches of this. The Howards were apparently Yorkists. So there are 2 sets of periods of time here, and I'm not certain if that's because they were, during the Lancastrian years, they were fleeing for their lives or not. I haven't looked that deeply into their family history. But yeah, Howard household books, published by Allen Sutton Publishing, Phoenix Mill, Stroud, and Gloucestershire. Yep. This one was actually published, even despite all those names that sound oh so English, this was published in, the publishing house is based in, in New Hampshire, but printed in Great Britain. Anne Crawford is an assistant keeper of the public records. She is a scholar of 15th century English history and has made many a specialized study of the career of John Howard. Her previous publications include A History of the Vintners Company, the Europa Biographical Dictionary of British Women, and Letters of the Queens of England. Oh, okay. So I actually have Letters of the Queens of England, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Yeah, so I can see if you read the little marginalia, you find the most interesting things. Letters of the Queens of England from 1100 to 1547. I can definitely recommend that if you're looking into the lives of great and powerful women of England in the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. Okay, and then I don't know if I've mentioned this one before, English coronation records. Now, this is a reprint of another of these Victorian works. If you are interested in ceremonies and how medieval ceremonies looked and felt, the different details, the clothing, the process, what people did, what they said, this is the book for you. And it actually covers the 8th century through to the early 20th century. I think George V's coronation ceremony. Sorry, Victoria. Victoria is the last. That makes sense. Sorry, 19th century. Victoria's coronation in the 1830s. So this one talks about, it actually provides like entire coronation orders, meaning the coronation order, the ordo, is actually the script for a coronation. Everything that is said and done by whom, when, and how, and what is worn. And so you can actually, if you ever want to create a coronation ceremony, like an actually medieval one, this is the book for you. But also it talks about the clothing of the kings and the queens. And for instance, this one includes, for Henry VII, emptions and provisions of stuff for the coronation of Henry VII. So necessaries for the coronation of Henry VII. And it's an inventory of items that were purchased and or commissioned for his coronation ceremony. And so it's lots of fabric, the kinds of fabric, how much fabric, who was paid to do what. It talks about the furring and the powdering. It's really it's a great window into the kind of clothing that would have been worn, that was worn by not just Henry VII, but by all of the various henchmen and footmen and retainers for this ceremony. For me, specifically interesting, though, is this includes the coronation of Richard III, which also includes the coronation of Anne Neville, his queen. So that's 1483. So it talks about his garments and it talks about her garments. And so very interesting window into material culture of the past. So English coronation records. This book was not expensive. I think it was $30. It's one of these reprints that's being published by Franklin Classics. So highly recommend. Okay. Let me just take a sip of tea for a while, holding forth, as it were. Any questions about any of those materials or any of the other things I've discussed, any of the resources? If you're just joining relatively recently, I'll just mention again while you guys think about any questions you might have before we part ways. Today's sponsors were Armor and Castings, medieval jewelers par excellence. Please do check out their website. And next week, I'll be doing an unboxing of some wonderful items they have sent me as part of my sponsorship package. They are great people. It's a great cause to support. Please check out Armor and Castings. And of course, I would again like to thank my patrons on Patreon who have generously been supporting my work over the years and continue to do so. If you would like to support my work on a more financial level, please do check out The Creative Contessa on Patreon. And more selfishly, you can also, if you want to just, if you ever feel you want to tip me, as it were, you can actually hit the super thanks button or the tip button under these live streams or under the videos. Anyway, if you're enjoying this, please do remember to hit the thumbs up. And once the video posts, if you could leave a comment under the video, that really helps push my channel in the algorithms, etc., etc. Okay, any other questions, comments, requests for future live streams? We just returned from Chiang Mai, and I've published some walking videos of Chiang Mai on my Travels with the Contessa channel, which you might enjoy. Chiang Mai was a medieval capital of the kingdom of Lanna, which got incorporated into Siam in the 19th century, and now it's all Thailand. But it actually is a medieval walled city, so you can actually walk around the walls and see many, many temples that are actually medieval in nature. So we had a really good time in Chiang Mai, and getting to experience some really, really beautiful sights and stunning architecture. And yeah, just really gorgeous food, gorgeous. That's Chiang Mai is up in the highlands, so we were actually in these beautiful green spaces that I've only seen previously in episodes of or editions of National Geographic. So I was literally living my childhood bucket list dream of walking through a National Geographic article on Thailand. Basically, it was pretty stunning. In fact, this skirt I'm wearing was made by a seamstress in Thailand who is selling at the walking market that happens there on Sunday night in Chiang Mai, where artisans actually come out and sell their wares. And they sit there and work on them while they're selling them. So you can actually see the artisans making all sorts of great things. Amazing lacquered and painted lacquerware that they're painting right there. Silver works. They're making clothes, hand carving wood items. I am going to be doing a presentation on my travel channel, actually, of all the handcraft items that I purchased in Thailand to show you the kinds of amazing things and what I consider the best kinds of souvenirs from a place. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Lisa Hartius says, should I look for German, I'm assuming that says Holy Roman Empire resources. There's a heart right over it, so I can't actually see what the word is. But yeah, yes, please. Actually, if you have time to look for German or Holy Roman Empire resources, that would be great. It is next on my long list of research goals because, okay, so, and here's why. Yes, please, Lisa, I would love it if you would look for German and Holy Roman Empire resources on clothing. Wills, inventories, expense accounts, maybe literary references. That would be fantastic. And that's because, so some of you know I've done a series on medieval women and underpants. And specifically, there are two schools of thought in the medieval fashion world, in the medieval living history world, and in the archaeological world. And one school of thought says that women never wore underwear, and the other school of thought says they did. And one of the reasons a lot of people think they don't is because of a lack of evidence. But just like with the evidence for breast support that everyone thought was non-existent, until you start finding it, looking for it, you won't find it. And so I've published a series on medieval women's underpants in which I present some really solid evidence for women having owned and worn underpants. But I wasn't able at the time, I did not find any German language resources, so nothing from the Holy Roman Empire or the other Germanic states. And for that reason, the pair of underwear that was found, the pair of braids that were found at Schloss Lengberg, the archaeologists who found them and the textile historians who study them claim, well, they must be for men. And the reason they must be for men is not because of any particular reason other than that there is no evidence for women in that part of the world wearing underpants. So the lack of evidence means it must have been for men, is the reasoning that I was given at any rate. So now I really, really, really want to find evidence of women having worn underpants in the Holy Roman Empire and the German states, as it were, Saxony and Bohemia and all of those places. So I'm convinced that there must be evidence. It just has to be found. But I'm also, of course, interested in all the other material cultural evidence of clothing and daily life in the German-speaking states. So yes, Lisa, that would be super, super kind if you would be willing to take on that task. That would be great. My email address is thecreativecontessa@gmail.com, and I'm also on Facebook, can be contacted there. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram and Kakao Talk and WhatsApp. I am everywhere. So if we want to chat, if you want to discuss, resources and findings, reach out to me there. Okay, let me see. What? Oh, sorry, my thing is doing something weird. Okay, any other questions or comments before we part ways, dear viewer? This tea is really strong. This is my Nepali pearl green tea. I'm really loving this Nepali pearl green tea. It's very, very nice. Very nice indeed. Maybe a little oversteeped, but that's okay. Well, let's see. Coming up, I'm going to hopefully tonight be publishing my Dressing the Burgundian Comtesse narrated video with all sorts of interesting information and details presented perspective. At least part one of it, not all of it, because it's going to be a much longer series of films than the first one I did. And then I'm going to be hopefully working on the next episode in the project log for this Camorra. And then we have the box openings for Armor and Castings and for Todd Cutler's stuff. I have a shipment of things from him and I don't remember what I ordered. So when I do that unboxing, it will be a surprise for both of us, dear viewer. Otherwise, I wish you all a lovely evening, morning, in whatever hemisphere or time zone you are. And remember, hit the thumbs up and please do post a comment in the comments under the video once it publishes. I appreciate everyone's support. Thank you for this week's Sip and Stitch and Bitch. Until next time, guys, stay creative.